My son sent me a text at 6:15 in the morning to tell me I was uninvited from the $25,000 luxury cruise I had paid for. He told me his wife wanted an exclusive trip with only her side of the family. He thought I would just sit quietly in the house I bought for them and accept the disrespect. He thought I was just a tired old man who would swallow his pride to keep the peace. He was wrong. By the time his luxury ship docked back in Miami 10 days later, I had frozen his bank accounts, sold the house he lived in, and arranged a welcoming committee of federal agents waiting for him on the driveway. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled his perfect life, let me know in the comments where you are watching this from and what time it is right now. It brings a lot of joy to this old man to know who is listening. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the rest of this story. My name is William Bennett. I am 70 years old and I live in Denver, Colorado. For 40 years, I ran a commercial logistics and freight company. I spent my life waking up at 4 in the morning, managing truck fleets, negotiating with difficult clients, and breathing in diesel fumes. So my family would never have to know the meaning of the word struggle. I built my business from a single used delivery van into a highly profitable regional network. I did not inherit a single dime of my wealth. I traded my youth, my sleep, and the cartilage in my joints to build a financial fortress for my loved ones. My wife passed away 5 years ago, leaving me with our only son, Matthew. Matthew is 35 years old now. He has a master's degree, a very comfortable job in corporate marketing, and a wife named Victoria. Victoria is 33. She grew up in a family that valued appearances, country club memberships, and social status over substance and hard work. From the very first day Matthew introduced her to me, I noticed how she looked at my calloused hands and my old work boots. She always smiled politely, but her eyes held a constant flicker of condescension. Still, she was my son's choice, the woman he claimed to love, so I welcomed her into the family with open arms. I paid for their lavish wedding. I helped them financially whenever they asked. I thought that was what a good father was supposed to do. Last month, I finally finalized the sale of my logistics company and officially entered retirement. To celebrate my 70th birthday and the start of this new peaceful chapter of my life, I decided to do something I had never done before. I booked a 10-day luxury Caribbean cruise. But I did not just book a ticket for myself. I wanted to share the fruits of my lifelong labor with the only family I had left. I paid exactly $25,000 to reserve VIP suites with private ocean balconies. I paid for first-class flights to Miami. I covered the premium dining packages, the shore excursion passes, everything. I wanted it to be the trip of a lifetime for me, Matthew, and Victoria. The departure was scheduled for a Saturday. I had already packed my suitcase. I had even gone out and bought a brand new tuxedo for the captain's formal dinner. I was genuinely excited to spend quality time with my son. Then came Tuesday. Exactly 4 days before we were supposed to fly out to the port, I was sitting in my kitchen sipping my morning black coffee and watching the sunrise over the distant Colorado mountains. At exactly 6:15 in the morning, my phone buzzed on the cold granite countertop. I reached for it, expecting a morning greeting, or maybe a quick question about our flight itinerary. It was a text message from Matthew. I put on my reading glasses and opened the message. It did not start with a greeting. It did not ask how I was doing. It was a single cold, sterile paragraph that made the breath catch sharply in my throat. Plans changed, and you are not coming on the cruise next week. Victoria wants only her family there. We will bring you back a souvenir. I sat there, in the silent kitchen, reading those 3 agonizing sentences over and over again. My brain absolutely refused to process the words on the glowing screen. You are not coming on the cruise. Victoria wants only her family there. We will bring you back a souvenir. A souvenir. For a $25,000 trip that I funded with the money I earned breaking my back for 4 decades, a heavy, suffocating silence filled the room. The only sound was the ticking of the wall clock. I felt a sharp physical pain in my chest, not from a medical issue, but from the sheer, unadulterated disrespect. I had given this boy everything. I paid his expensive college tuition so he would graduate without a single cent of student debt. I bought the very bed he was sleeping in when he typed out that cruel text. And he uninvited me to my own birthday celebration via a text message at dawn. I did not reply to the text. My hands were shaking with a mix of profound shock and a slow, burning, dangerous anger. I pressed the call button. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times and went straight to voicemail. I took a deep, shaky breath, fighting the intense urge to throw the phone against the kitchen wall. I hit redial. Again it rang, and then the call was manually declined. He was actively pressing the ignore button. The boy, who could not even look me in the eye to tell me I was unwanted, was now hiding behind a digital screen. I dialed a 3rd time. I let it ring. I was not going to stop. I was prepared to call him 50 times in a row if I had to. On the 4th ring, the line clicked open. Dad, Matthew whispered. His voice was hushed, rushed, and laced with irritation rather than any hint of guilt. I cannot talk right now. Victoria is sleeping. Matthew, I said. My voice was dangerously low. It was the exact same tone I used when a corrupt contractor tried to cheat me out of a shipment. What is the meaning of this text message? I paid for this trip. I bought those sweets. I know, Dad, and I am sorry, he whispered loudly, rushing his words as if my phone call was an unbearable inconvenience to his morning. But things changed. Victoria's parents decided they wanted to come at the last minute. Her sister is coming too. They really want this to be an exclusive bonding trip for their side of the family. You being there would just make things incredibly awkward for everyone. Awkward. The word echoed loudly in my ear. My presence on my 70th birthday on a luxury vacation I paid for would be awkward for my daughter-in-law's family. You are telling me, I said, gripping the edge of the kitchen counter so hard my knuckles turned white, that I am paying for Victoria's parents and her sister to take my place on my own birthday cruise. No, Dad, of course not, Matthew stammered quickly. He sounded panicked now, realizing he had pushed me a little too far. Victoria's dad paid for their own cabins. They booked their own flights. It is just that they want to do these very specific family excursions. It is a lot of walking. With your knees acting up lately, Victoria is just worried you would slow everybody down and you would end up feeling left out. She is actually looking out for you. I closed my eyes. The audacity of the lie was absolutely staggering. My knees, I play 18 holes of golf every single Saturday without a cart. I hike the steep trails in the foothills every Sunday morning. I am in significantly better physical shape at 70 than Matthew is at 35. Victoria was not looking out for me. She was erasing me from the picture. Matthew, I started, but he quickly cut me off. Besides Dad, he continued, his whisper growing more frantic and dismissive. Victoria is under a massive amount of stress at work right now. She really needs this vacation to be absolutely perfect and completely drama-free. I will pay you back for your unused ticket when we get back. Okay. Just let us have this one thing. Do not make it a big drama. I have to go. The line went dead. He hung up on me. I pulled the phone away from my ear and stared blankly at the dark screen. Do not make it a big drama. He had stolen my birthday. He had allowed his snobby wife to banish me from my own retirement celebration. And he had the incredible nerve to tell me not to make it a drama. I walked over to the window and looked out at the quiet suburban street. The sun was fully up now, casting long, sharp shadows across my driveway. The initial shock of the betrayal was beginning to fade rapidly, replaced by a cold, highly calculating clarity. If Victoria's father had truly paid for their own cabins, why had I received a security notification from my American Express application just 2 days ago about a pending $12,000 charge to Royal Caribbean? I walked out of the kitchen and headed straight down the hallway to my home office. I sat down at my heavy oak desk and opened my laptop. I was about to find out that uninviting me from the cruise was not just an act of emotional cruelty. It was the desperate cover for a massive, calculated financial betrayal. And they had absolutely no idea who they were dealing with. The glowing screen of my laptop illuminated the dark wood of my desk. Before my fingers could even touch the keyboard to open my bank portal, my cell phone vibrated violently against the mahogany surface. The caller identification displayed. Matthew once again. I stared at his name for a long moment. My chest felt tight, but my mind was remarkably clear. I took a slow, deep breath, steadying my nerves, and pressed the green button to accept the call. I brought the phone to my ear, but remained completely silent, waiting for him to speak first. "Dad," Matthew said. The hushed, frantic whisper from his previous call was completely gone. His voice was now booming, echoing slightly over the Bluetooth connection of his car. I could hear the faint hum of highway traffic in the background. I was clearly driving to work safely away from his sleeping wife, feeling much bolder now that he was alone. "Listen, I am sorry about hanging up earlier. Mornings are just incredibly chaotic around here right now." I did not offer him a polite response. I did not tell him it was okay. I simply waited, letting the silence stretch across the cellular connection until it became suffocating. "Dad, are you there?" he asked, his tone shifting into something that sounded remarkably like forced patience. It was the exact tone a person might use when speaking to a confused child. "I am here, Matthew," I replied, my voice steady and completely devoid of emotion. "I am waiting for a logical explanation as to why I am no longer welcome on a $25,000 vacation that I paid for out of my own retirement savings." Matthew let out a long, heavy sigh. It was a theatrical performance of exhaustion. "Dad, we already went over this. It is really not that complicated. Victoria's parents decided they wanted to join us on the cruise. They booked their own cabins. They paid their own way. Her sister decided to tag along as well. It just snowballed into this massive family reunion for their side. Victoria just wants to spend some quality, uninterrupted time with her parents. You know how stressful her marketing job has been lately. So her family is joining the cruise," I stated, keeping my tone perfectly level. "That still does not explain why I am suddenly forbidden from boarding the ship. The ocean is massive, Matthew. The ship holds 3,000 people. I fail to see how my presence in my own private suite ruins her family bonding." "It is not about you ruining anything, Dad," Matthew said quickly, his voice dripping with synthetic empathy. "Victoria is actually looking out for you. She is deeply concerned about your well-being on this trip. We both are, honestly." "My well-being?" I repeated, my grip tightening on the edge of my desk. "What exactly is wrong with my well-being?" "Well, you know," Matthew said, pausing as if searching for the most delicate way to deliver devastating news. "The excursions they have planned for this trip are extremely intense. There is going to be a massive amount of walking, climbing up steep hills, and navigating rocky beaches. Victoria is just incredibly worried about your bad knees. She does not want you to push yourself too hard, slow everyone down, and then end up feeling completely left out and miserable. She thought it would be much kinder for you to just stay home and rest comfortably." I closed my eyes, absorbing the sheer, unadulterated audacity of his words. My bad knees. The phrase echoed in my mind like a poorly written joke. "Matthew," I said, articulating every single syllable with razor-sharp precision. "I play 18 holes of golf every single Saturday morning. I do not use a golf cart. I walk the entire course carrying my own clubs. On Sunday mornings, I hike the steep rocky trails in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. I have never complained about my knees a single day in my life. My joints are in significantly better condition than yours." "Dad, please," Matthew interrupted, his voice rising in volume, attempting to talk over me. "You are not 30 years old anymore. You have to admit you have been slowing down tremendously lately. You have been so forgetful, too. Just last week, you could not even remember the name of that restaurant we went to for Victoria's birthday. You are getting older, Dad. It is perfectly natural to lose a step or two. We are just trying to be realistic about what you can physically and mentally handle right now. The restaurant he was referring to was a pretentious, overpriced bistro with a complicated French name that I simply did not care to memorize. Using that single insignificant moment to build a narrative that I was losing my cognitive faculties was not just insulting. It was deeply, maliciously manipulative. My son was actively gaslighting me. He was attempting to rewrite my own reality to justify his profound disrespect. I am perfectly capable of handling a luxury cruise, Matthew, I replied, my voice dropping an octave. I handled a fleet of 200 commercial freight trucks for 4 decades. I handled million-dollar negotiations while you were still trying to figure out how to tie your own shoes. See, this is exactly what I am talking about. Matthew snapped, his tone instantly shifting from fake concern to aggressive defense. You always do this, Dad. You always turn everything into a massive conflict. You always have to bring up the business and how hard you worked. I am trying to have a mature, reasonable conversation with you, and you are acting completely irrational. You are getting incredibly defensive over nothing. I was acting irrational. The man who had just stolen my retirement vacation was calling me irrational for defending my own sanity. I am not acting irrational, I said firmly. I am calling out a blatant lie. If Victoria's parents paid their own way, why do I need to be removed from the trip? The math does not add up, Matthew. Dad, stop. Just stop. Matthew groaned loudly into the phone. I am driving to work. I have a massive presentation at 9 o'clock, and I cannot deal with this kind of toxic energy right now. Victoria is already stressed enough as it is. We just want a peaceful, relaxing vacation. I told you I would pay you back for your unused ticket when we return. Just let it go. Stop making such a big drama out of this. A big drama? I asked quietly. Yes, a big drama. Matthew insisted, his voice sharp and dismissive. You are sitting safely in your beautiful home. You have plenty of money. You can take a trip anywhere else in the world whenever you want. You do not need to ruin this for Victoria. Please, Dad, for once in your life, just be reasonable and step aside. Let us have this trip without making us feel horribly guilty about it. I have to go now. My exit is coming up. I will call you when we get back from Miami. Goodbye. The line went dead. The glowing screen of my laptop illuminated the dark wood of my desk, casting a harsh light over the quiet room. I sat perfectly still for a moment, letting the heavy silence of the house settle around me. The phantom echo of my son telling me not to make a big drama out of this situation still rang in my ears. He had tried to convince me that I was becoming forgetful, that my body was breaking down, and that keeping me away from a luxury vacation was an act of mercy. It was a constructed lie, delivered with just enough fake concern to make an old man doubt his own reality. But I was not a foolish old man. I had spent 40 years running a massive logistics enterprise. I knew how to spot a discrepancy in a supply chain, and I certainly knew how to spot a discrepancy in a narrative. My gut was screaming that the math simply did not add up. If Victoria's parents were truly paying for their own premium cabins at the absolute last minute, they would have used their own travel agent. But my mind kept returning to the security alert I had received on my cellular phone just 48 hours earlier. I placed my hands on the keyboard and navigated directly to my primary financial portal. I typed in my credentials with slow, deliberate keystrokes. I bypassed my retirement portfolios and my standard savings accounts, clicking straight into the daily ledger for my main American Express card. The page took a fraction of a second to load. There, sitting at the very top of the pending transactions list, was a charge for exactly $12,450. The merchant was Royal Caribbean International. I had already paid $25,000 months ago to secure our initial premium suites. This new massive charge was entirely separate. $12,000 was not the cost of an upgraded drink package or a few family shore excursions. That was the exact cost of multiple additional luxury cabins. My son had looked me right in the eye, virtually speaking, and lied. Victoria's family had not paid their own way. My credit line was paying their way. A cold, mechanical precision settled heavily over my thoughts. The heartbroken father who wanted nothing more than to celebrate his 70th birthday with his only child was suddenly gone. In his place was the ruthless executive who used to track down missing inventory and destroy fraudulent suppliers. I needed to see the entire financial picture, and I needed to see it right now. I navigated back to the main dashboard of my banking portal and scrolled down to the very bottom of my account list. There, buried beneath my primary checking and investment accounts, was an old secondary joint checking account. I had opened this specific account 15 years ago. I remembered the exact afternoon. I had driven Matthew down to the local bank branch the week before he moved away for his freshman year of college. I set it up as a safety net. I wanted to guarantee that if his car ever broke down in the freezing snow, or if he ever needed emergency medical attention, he would never have to panic about money. Over the years, even after he graduated, secured a comfortable corporate job, and married Victoria, I kept the account open. I would occasionally drop a few $1,000s into it for his birthday, or just to help them out around the holidays. I rarely ever checked the balance. I trusted him to use it responsibly. I treated it as an invisible, silent cushion for my only child. I clicked on the joint account to open the transaction history. When the bright red numbers finally appeared on the screen, all the air completely vanished from my lungs. The account balance, which I knew for a fact, had held a comfortable cushion of roughly $40,000. Just a few months ago was now sitting at exactly $214. I stared at the screen, blinking hard, gripping the edges of my desk so tightly that my knuckles turned completely white. I grabbed my wireless mouse and aggressively scrolled down to view the most recent transaction ledger. A cascading waterfall of massive, unauthorized charges flooded the screen, painting a horrifying, undeniable picture of unchecked financial gluttony. 3 days ago, there was a cleared transaction for exactly $15,000. The merchant was a highly exclusive, bespoke jewelry designer located in the most expensive luxury shopping district of downtown Denver. Victoria did not need $15,000 worth of custom high-end jewelry for a simple family bonding vacation. I scrolled down further, my heart hammering a furious rhythm against my ribs. 4 days ago, there was another charge for $8,500. The merchant listed was a luxury bridal and evening wear boutique, known for importing custom silk gowns directly from Europe. $8,000 for clothing. My eyes darted to the next line. There were rapid-fire charges for high-end salon services, expensive designer luggage retailers, and a massive $2,000 deposit to a private luxury ground transportation company based in Miami. The devastating truth hit me with the force of a physical blow to the chest. Victoria's family was not paying a single dime for this trip. Matthew was bleeding my safety net completely dry to fund an extravagant, wildly expensive vacation for his snobby in-laws. He was actively using the emergency money I had saved for him to buy his wife custom jewelry and designer gowns. The pieces of the puzzle aggressively snapped into place. Matthew had not uninvited me because Victoria wanted an exclusive bonding experience. He had not uninvited me because he was genuinely worried about my knees slowing them down. He uninvited me because if I had boarded that luxury ship, I would have seen the truth. I would have seen Victoria parading around the formal dining room in an $8,000 gown. I would have seen her parents drinking premium, vintage champagne that I had unwittingly purchased. I would have seen the massive, luxurious spectacle they had built using my stolen retirement funds. They desperately needed me off that ship so they could play the role of generous, wealthy hosts to Victoria's extended family, all while treating me like a senile old fool who was simply too frail to travel. They had manufactured a cruel, manipulative lie about my physical and mental decline strictly to keep me away from the scene of their financial crime. I sat back in my heavy leather office chair, feeling a sudden sharp wave of nausea followed immediately by an overwhelming icy rage. I had sacrificed my body to build a legacy, and my son was treating my life's work like a bottomless wishing well for a woman who could not even stand the sight of me. I looked back at the glowing screen, scanning the devastating list of charges. The jewelry, the boutique, the luxury transport. It was staggering. But as I continued to scrutinize the ledger looking for any other anomalies, my eyes caught something else entirely. It was a transaction from 2 weeks ago that did not fit the pattern of luxury vacation spending. It was a direct wire transfer out of the joint account. The amount was relatively small compared to the others, just $3,000. But it was the destination of the wire transfer that made my blood run absolutely cold in my veins. The money had not gone to a luxury retailer or a travel agency. It had been wired directly to a local law firm. I recognized the name of the firm. They specialized exclusively in family law estate planning and elder care litigation. Why would my 35-year-old son, who was supposedly just planning a fun Caribbean getaway, need to wire $3,000 to an elder care attorney? I leaned forward, my face inches from the screen. The gaslighting on the phone. The aggressive insistence that I was losing my memory. The fake concern about my physical decline. It was not just a pathetic excuse to keep me off a cruise ship. It was the early foundation of a much darker, much more sinister strategy. They were not just stealing my vacation fund. They were building a legal case against me. I closed the laptop with a soft, definitive click. The silence returned to the office, but I was no longer the heartbroken father who had woken up to a cruel text message. I was a man preparing for war. I was a man preparing for war. The 4 days between that devastating Tuesday morning and their departure on Saturday felt like the longest days of my entire life. I did not call Matthew back. I did not send a single text message demanding an explanation or fighting for my rightful place on that luxury ship. Silence was my greatest weapon. Let them believe their manipulative lies had worked perfectly. Let them board that luxury cruise feeling completely victorious and entirely unburdened by guilt. I needed them thousands of miles away, floating in the middle of the ocean, disconnected completely. When Saturday morning finally arrived, the sky over the suburbs was a crisp, clear blue. I drove my dark gray sedan into their affluent neighborhood just before 8 o'clock. I parked exactly 2 blocks away from their property, positioning my car under the thick shade of an old oak tree where I would not be easily spotted. I sat in the driver's seat, gripping the leather steering wheel, staring down the quiet manicured street at the massive 2-story house sitting at the very end of the quiet residential dead-end street. My heart was steady. I waited very silently. That house was a monument to my own foolish generosity. 3 years ago, Matthew and Victoria had been complaining relentlessly about the rising cost of apartment rent in the city. They claimed they were completely unable to save for their future. Like a dutiful, loving father, I stepped in to solve their problem. I purchased that sprawling 4-bedroom suburban house for $900,000. I paid for it entirely in cash. I did not want them to carry the heavy burden of a 30-year mortgage. I placed the property into a family trust account, keeping total ownership. I named myself as the sole trustee. I allowed them to live there absolutely rent-free, and I even continued to pay the hefty annual property taxes out of my own pocket. I gave them a financial head start that most young couples can only dream of. Now, sitting 2 blocks away watching the front door of the house I owned, I felt like a complete stranger. I was crossing a psychological boundary that could never be uncrossed. I was no longer a father looking out for his beloved son. I was a man staking out an active crime scene. At exactly 8:15, a large black luxury sport utility vehicle pulled into the driveway. The airport transport had arrived. A few moments later, the heavy wooden front door swung open. Matthew walked out first. He was wearing expensive designer sunglasses and a crisp linen shirt, looking utterly relaxed and carefree. He did not look like a man burdened by the guilt of abandoning his aging father. He looked like a man who had successfully pulled off a massive financial heist. Victoria followed closely behind him, dressed in a pristine white resort outfit, holding an expensive bag. They looked happy. But it was not just the two of them. It was the luggage that made my stomach turn. Matthew and the driver began hauling massive brand-new designer suitcases out of the front hallway. There were 6 enormous bags in total. They were not the standard durable canvas bags we used to travel with. They were premium luxury cases that cost over $1,000 apiece. I watched the driver struggle to lift the bags into the trunk of the vehicle. Every piece of that luggage, every expensive garment folded inside those cases had been purchased with my stolen cash. They were parading my hard-earned wealth right out in the open, completely devoid of any shame. Victoria stood on the driveway laughing brightly at something the driver said, holding a steaming cup of coffee. Matthew wrapped his arm around her waist, kissing her cheek, before opening the passenger door for her. They looked like the absolute picture of a perfect, successful, wealthy young couple heading off on a well-deserved vacation. It was a flawless illusion, built entirely on a foundation of cruel deception and relentless financial abuse. I just kept breathing very quietly. I observed them leaving now. I watched them climb into the back seat. The driver closed the doors, walked around to the front, and started the powerful engine. The heavy vehicle slowly backed out of the driveway, turned down the street, and glided right past my parked car. They did not even glance in my direction. They were too busy looking forward, completely unaware that the man they had left behind was watching their every move. I watched the red taillights of the vehicle disappear around the corner, heading toward the bustling International Airport highway. The silence returned slowly now. I finally felt very cold. The street grew quiet once again. I reached forward and tapped the digital clock on my dashboard. I gave them exactly 10 minutes. I needed to be absolutely certain they had merged onto the main highway and were not turning back for a forgotten passport or a misplaced phone charger. Those 10 minutes felt like an eternity. The silence in my car was deafening. Every second that ticked by eroded the last remaining fragments of my paternal hesitation. When the digital clock finally shifted, I turned off the engine and stepped out into the cool morning air. I was ready. I walked down the quiet suburban sidewalk, my footsteps echoing softly against the concrete. I approached the manicured front lawn, walking up the wide stone pathway leading to the grand entryway. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a heavy brass key. It was the master key to the property. I had kept it solely for extreme emergencies, promising them I would never invade their privacy or show up unannounced. I had respected their boundaries for 3 entire years, but they had obliterated every single boundary of trust, respect, and basic human decency. The old rules vanished completely. I slid the brass key into the heavy front lock. The mechanism turned with a solid, satisfying click. I pushed the door open and stepped into the grand foyer of my own property. The immediate smell of stale, expensive champagne and strong floral perfume hit my senses. I closed the door firmly behind me, locking the deadbolt, and turned to face the reality of how they were living on my dime. The house was a disaster. It looked like the aftermath of a reckless celebration. I walked slowly from the entryway into the massive open-concept kitchen. I stared blankly. The granite countertops that I had personally selected and paid for were completely covered in clutter. Empty bottles of premium champagne were scattered across the island, surrounded by discarded catering boxes. They had clearly hosted a lavish kickoff party. I moved past the living room, ignoring the custom Italian leather sofa buried under discarded shopping bags from exclusive high-end boutiques. My focus was not on the visual representation of their financial gluttony. I turned my back on the ruined space and walked purposefully down the hallway. I headed straight toward Matthew's private home office. I was truly ready now. The heavy, solid oak door to his office was firmly shut. I placed my right hand on the polished brass knob and pushed it open, stepping into the quiet sanctuary where my son supposedly spent his days working hard for his future. Soft morning light filtered through the large plantation shutters, It smelled faintly of expensive leather and masculine cologne. Matthew decorated this space to look like a highly successful executive office. A massive mahogany desk dominated the center of the room, flanked by plush seating and modern artwork. But as I stood there taking in the curated perfection of his professional environment, all I could feel was a profound sense of betrayal. He was playing the role of a self-made man, entirely forgetting that I had purchased the very floorboards he walked on. I walked past his pristine desk, my eyes scanning the perimeter of the room. I was not looking for loose papers or digital hard drives left carelessly in the open. I knew exactly where his true secrets were buried. My attention shifted to the far wall. Stretching from the floor to the ceiling was a magnificent custom-built library unit. I knew every inch of that wooden structure because I built it myself. 3 years ago, right after I purchased this property for them, Matthew mentioned that he wanted a classic built-in library for his new workspace. I spent 3 entire weeks in my personal workshop, cutting, sanding, and staining the premium walnut panels. I poured my heart, my sweat, and my deep paternal pride into every single joint and hinge of that unit. I wanted it to be a permanent physical symbol of my unwavering support for his career. I wanted him to look at those shelves and remember that his father was always standing solidly behind him. That memory now tasted like bitter ash in my mouth. He had taken my labor of love and turned it into a hiding place for his deceptions. I walked toward the right side of the massive shelving unit, stopping in front of the bottom filing cabinets. The exterior of the wooden drawers looked perfectly normal, designed to blend seamlessly into the traditional aesthetic of the surrounding woodwork. But I knew the structural secrets hidden behind the decorative walnut paneling. I crouched down onto the hardwood floor. I ignored the slight physical ache, focusing entirely on the task at hand. I reached out and firmly grasped the brass handle of the bottom right filing drawer. I pulled it open. At first glance, the drawer appeared to be a standard deep storage space filled with hanging file folders containing routine household warranties and appliance manuals. It was a remarkably clever facade designed to deter casual snooping. But I was not a casual intruder. I was the master carpenter who had designed the false bottom. I reached past the hanging folders, pressing my fingers firmly against the smooth wooden panel at the very back. I found the small, invisible groove hidden along the bottom edge. I pushed upward and then pulled forward. The false wooden backing popped loose with a soft click, sliding smoothly out of its concealed tracks. I carefully set the wooden panel aside on the floor. The dark hidden cavity was finally exposed. Sitting perfectly flush inside the custom-reinforced compartment was a heavy state-of-the-art, fireproof steel safe. It was a serious piece of security equipment, the kind used to protect highly sensitive corporate documents and significant amounts of physical currency. The front of the heavy steel box featured a sleek digital keypad, emitting a faint blue glow in the shadows of the cabinet. I knew Matthew had likely changed the primary access code several times over the past 3 years to ensure his absolute privacy. He probably felt incredibly secure, believing that a complex string of numbers kept his deepest secrets entirely safe from the outside world. He had completely forgotten one crucial detail. When I originally purchased and installed this specific model of fireproof safe for him as a housewarming gift, I retained the factory override access code. It was a standard safety protocol I always followed to ensure we could recover important family documents in the event of an absolute emergency. I never imagined the emergency would be protecting myself from my own flesh and blood. I reached forward my hand, hovering steadily over the glowing digital keypad. I took a slow, deep breath to calm the furious pounding in my chest. I pressed the buttons in rapid succession, entering the long, complicated sequence of numbers that I had committed to memory 3 years ago. The digital display flashed a bright, solid green. A loud mechanical thud echoed from deep within the heavy steel door as the internal locking bolts finally retracted. I grabbed the cold metal handle and pulled. The heavy door swung open, revealing the dark, organized interior of my son's hidden sanctuary. I leaned closer, peering into the shadows of the illuminated steel box. The safe was neatly divided into two distinct horizontal shelves. The bottom shelf was tightly packed with thick, uninteresting stacks of standard financial paperwork. I saw bound copies of their joint tax returns from the previous 2 years, an original copy of their marriage certificate, and the vehicle titles for their luxury cars. I completely ignored those mundane documents. They were merely the boring administrative records of their daily lives. My intense focus immediately shifted to the top shelf. It was almost entirely empty, save for a single thick manila folder resting squarely in the center of the cold metal surface. The folder was remarkably thick, bulging, slightly at the seams, clearly stuffed with a massive amount of freshly printed documentation. It was not casually tossed inside. It was placed there deliberately, elevated above the rest of their standard financial history like an item of supreme importance. I reached my trembling hands deep into the safe and carefully pulled the remarkably heavy manila folder out into the bright natural light of the home office. I placed it very gently and deliberately onto the polished hardwood floor right in front of my knees. I looked down at the front cover. Written across the center of the thick paper in bold, aggressive black ink were two simple words: Project Horizon. The title sounded like a massive, ambitious corporate marketing campaign, but I knew my son was not hiding standard office work inside a fireproof safe. My hands were trembling slightly as I stared at the bold, dark letters. The lingering scent of his expensive cologne hung heavy in the silent room. A sickening reminder of the affluent, carefree man who had confidently walked out the front door just 30 minutes earlier. I rested my hand on the edge of the folder, feeling the physical weight of the hidden documents beneath the paper cover. The cold, mechanical clarity in my mind sharpened into a singular, undeniable focus. I took a deep breath and slowly flipped the heavy manila cover open completely and utterly unprepared for the truly devastating legal reality that was about to permanently destroy the few remaining fragile fragments of my shattered family. I pulled the thick manila folder onto my lap, resting my back against the cool wooden panels of the custom cabinetry I had built for him. The ambient light in the office suddenly felt harsh and unforgiving. I took a slow, deep breath, steadying my hands, and folded back the heavy paper cover. The very first document staring back at me was printed on the thick, high-quality stationery of a major national bank. I recognized the blue and silver logo immediately. It was the same financial institution I had used for my commercial logistics company for over 2 decades. But this was not a commercial account document. The bold black letters printed across the top of the page read, "Home Equity Line of Credit Agreement." My eyes scanned down the page, moving past the standard banking jargon and legal disclaimers. I was looking for the property address associated with the loan. I found it neatly typed in the second paragraph. It was the exact street address of the house I was currently sitting inside. The beautiful, sprawling suburban home that I had purchased entirely in cash 3 years ago. The home I had placed in a protective family trust to ensure my son and his wife would never have to worry about a monthly mortgage payment. I moved my gaze to the right side of the page, searching for the principal loan amount. The number was printed clearly in a designated rectangular box: $500,000. I stopped breathing. The air in the room seemed to vanish completely. $500,000, $500,000 in liquid cash. Matthew had not just opened a small secret credit card to fund his wife's shopping habits. He had quietly taken out a massive, heavily leveraged federal bank loan against the total equity of my property. He had essentially mortgaged the free house I gave him, transforming my generous financial gift into a mountain of crippling high-interest debt. But the sheer magnitude of the stolen money was only the first layer of the betrayal. A much darker, far more terrifying realization began to form in my mind. A cold sweat broke out across the back of my neck as the legal mechanics of this transaction became crystal clear. This property did not belong to Matthew. His name was not on the deed. Victoria's name was not on the deed. The house was legally owned by a private family trust. I was the sole creator and the absolute sole trustee of that entity. No bank in the United States of America would ever approve a $500,000 home equity line of credit without the explicit, notarized, and verified signature of the primary property owner. Matthew could not simply walk into a bank branch and leverage an asset he did not legally possess. The bank would require my direct authorization. They would require my signature on dozens of highly regulated federal financial forms. I aggressively flipped past the first 3 pages of the loan agreement, my hands moving with a frantic, desperate energy. I bypassed the interest rate disclosures and the repayment schedules. I was hunting for the final execution page. I needed to see exactly how my son had bypassed the strict legal protections of the trust. I found the execution page near the back of the first stapled packet. I stared down at the bottom right corner of the document. There, sitting perfectly centered on the primary borrower signature line, was my name, William Bennett. It was not a clumsy, handwritten forgery. It was not a desperate attempt to mimic my handwriting with a blue ink pen. It was absolutely flawless. I leaned in closer, bringing the paper just inches from my face. I recognized the specific curvature of the capital W and the sharp, distinct angle of the double T at the end of my last name. It was my exact signature, perfectly replicated in a crisp digital format. The reality of what I was looking at hit me with the force of a freight train. 2 years ago, when I was preparing to sell my commercial logistics company, the volume of legal paperwork was absolutely staggering. To streamline the acquisition process, Matthew had offered to help me digitize my corporate records. He had sat in my home office, scanned my primary identification documents, and helped me create a verified digital signature file to use on the countless acquisition contracts. I had trusted him completely. I had given him unrestricted access to my most sensitive administrative tools. He had kept a copy of that digital signature file. He had saved it, stored it, and weaponized it. He did not just use it once. The document showed multiple dates of digital signing, indicating a prolonged, systematic process of deception. He had to forge my initials on the preliminary credit check authorizations. He had to apply my full signature to the property appraisal consent forms. Every single step of the lengthy federal loan approval process required him to sit at his computer and deliberately impersonate me. He had weeks to stop weeks to feel guilty. Weeks to realize he was committing a massive felony. But he never stopped. He pushed the fraud all the way to the final closing documents. My son had systematically applied my stolen digital signature to federal banking applications. He had falsely presented himself as an authorized agent of my trust. He had submitted these fraudulent documents across state lines to a major national bank to extract $500,000 from the equity of my home. This was no longer a simple family dispute over a stolen vacation fund. This was not a matter of a spoiled daughter-in-law spending too much money at a luxury boutique. This was a premeditated, highly calculated federal crime. It was felony wire fraud. It was identity theft of the highest order. It was massive real estate fraud. By executing these documents, Matthew had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed with a simple apology or a promise to pay me back. I had knowingly committed a crime that carried a mandatory federal prison sentence. I slowly lowered the document back onto the stack, resting my hands on my knees. The profound depth of his deception was almost impossible to process. He had stolen $500,000 in my name, effectively putting me in debt for a property I had already paid for in full. If the bank ever called the loan, or if Matthew defaulted on the massive monthly payments, the financial institution would have the absolute legal right to foreclose on the property. They would seize the house, evict the occupants, and completely destroy my credit rating in the process. The bank would not care about family drama or stolen identities. They would see a legally binding contract featuring my verified signature. The legal battle to prove the forgery would take years and cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Matthew had trapped me in a financial nightmare carefully designed to look entirely like my own doing. I took one very deep breath and pulled the next file forward, bracing for the impact. I pulled the next stack of papers from the heavy manila folder, my hands moving with a rigid mechanical stiffness. The top sheet was a thick, glossy invoice bearing the familiar blue and yellow logo of Royal Caribbean International. At first glance, I assumed it was simply the final booking confirmation for the luxury cruise I thought we were taking together. I expected to see the standard itinerary, the cabin assignments for the three of us, and perhaps a few modest shore excursions. But as I flipped through the multi-page document, the true nature of their trip began to reveal itself with sickening clarity. This was not a simple family vacation. This was not a quiet, relaxing getaway designed to help Victoria recover from the stress of her corporate marketing job. Printed across the top of the third page in an elegant, sweeping cursive font was the official title of their group booking. It read, "The Vow Renewal Spectacular of Victoria and Matthew." I stared at the words, feeling a fresh wave of cold disbelief wash over me. They were not just taking a trip. They were hosting a massive, lavish destination wedding. They had been married for exactly 5 years. A 5-year anniversary is traditionally celebrated with a nice dinner or a quiet weekend away. It is not an occasion that requires chartering a luxury cruise ship. But Matthew and Victoria had decided to use my stolen home equity to stage an opulent, theatrical celebration of their own vanity. I moved my eyes down to the itemized billing section. The numbers printed on the page were absolutely staggering. The grand total at the bottom of the final sheet was not $25,000. It was $150,000. I felt a physical weight press down on my chest. $150,000. That was more money than I had made during the first 3 years of building my logistics company. It was a sum of wealth that required thousands of hours of breaking my back, loading freight in freezing temperatures and skipping meals to make payroll. My son had stolen that money with a forged signature and spent it on a single prolonged party. I scrutinized the detailed breakdown of the charges, eager to understand exactly how two people could spend $150,000 on a 10-day cruise. The answer was printed on the passenger manifest, attached to the back of the invoice. There were not just 3 cabins booked, there were 10. I ran my finger down the list of registered passengers. I saw the names of Victoria's parents. I saw the name of her younger sister. I saw the names of her aunts, her uncles, and her cousins. There were exactly 20 members of Victoria's extended family listed on the official group manifest. Every single one of them was booked into a premium first-class suite with a private ocean balcony. The lie Matthew had fed me on the phone just 4 days ago shattered completely. He had sworn to me that Victoria's parents were paying their own way. He had insisted they were simply tagging along at the last minute. The manifest proved that was a total fabrication. This entire massive group booking had been finalized and paid in full over 3 months ago. Matthew had deliberately funded a luxury vacation for his wife's entire bloodline, using the money he had secretly siphoned from the equity of my home. The sheer scale of the financial gluttony was breathtaking. I looked at the specific event packages they had added to the master bill. They had purchased the ultimate premium open bar package for all 20 adult guests. They had reserved the grand ballroom on the ship for a private catered reception following the vow renewal ceremony. They had hired a team of professional destination photographers to document their every move. They had even rented a private, secluded beach cabana compound for the entire group during their scheduled stop in the Bahamas. They were treating Victoria's family like absolute royalty. They were providing them with an all-expenses-paid first-class luxury experience, and the entire spectacle was being funded by the man they had coldly uninvited via a text message at dawn. The pieces of their cruel psychological puzzle finally locked perfectly into place. I finally understood exactly why they had to remove me from the trip. It was not because of my knees. It was not because they wanted exclusive bonding time. It was because my presence on that ship would have completely destroyed the grand illusion they were selling to Victoria's family. If I had walked onto that luxury liner, Victoria's parents would have immediately thanked me for my incredible generosity. They would have shaken my hand and expressed their deep gratitude for the free first-class suites and the premium champagne. Matthew and Victoria could not allow that to happen. They needed Victoria's family to believe that Matthew was a wildly successful, incredibly wealthy young executive who could effortlessly afford to drop $150,000 on a vow renewal. They needed to play the role of the ultimate power couple. If the actual source of their funding was standing right there in the grand ballroom, sipping a club soda and celebrating his 70th birthday, their pathetic facade would have instantly crumbled. I was not a father to them. I was not a grandfather to their future children. I was nothing more than an unacknowledged financial sponsor. I was the silent bank rolling their desperate need for social validation. The profound cruelty of their plan was suffocating. I had spent the last week feeling hurt and rejected, wondering if I had somehow failed to be a good enough father. I had worried that my aging presence was genuinely becoming a burden to my only child. I had allowed their manipulative gaslighting to make me question my own worth. But the truth printed on those glossy cruise line invoices absolved me of any guilt. I had done nothing wrong. I had simply raised a son who lacked a basic moral compass, and he had married a woman who viewed my life's work as her own personal lottery ticket. I slowly set the Royal Caribbean documents down on the floor. Next to the home equity loan agreement, I had uncovered the massive financial theft. I had uncovered the destination vow renewal. I had discovered exactly how they were spending the stolen $500,000. But the thick manila folder still held a few remaining documents. The final stack of papers was noticeably different from the rest. They were not printed on colorful travel agency letterhead, and they did not feature the logos of major national banks. They were printed on heavy plain white legal bond paper. They looked sterile, clinical, and profoundly serious. I reached into the folder and pulled the final packet out into the light. I had already survived the shock of the federal wire fraud and the devastating realization of the lavish vow renewal. I thought I had reached the absolute bottom of their betrayal. I thought nothing could possibly hurt me more than knowing my son had stolen my equity to throw a party for his wife's family. But as I read the bold, black legal heading printed across the top of the very first page, I realized the true nightmare had not even begun. They were not just planning to steal my money. They were preparing to steal the rest of my natural life. I took one last deep breath and braced myself for the final, most devastating impact. I took one last deep breath and braced myself for the final, most devastating impact. The paper was thick, textured, and bound with a heavy blue legal backing. It felt entirely different from the glossy cruise brochures or the standard bank loan agreements. I rested the document on my lap, smoothing my hand over the crisp white page. Across the top center, printed in a harsh, uncompromising black font, was the name of a local law firm. I recognized the name from local television advertisements. They were a notorious, aggressive group of attorneys who specialized in hostile family litigation and estate takeovers. I moved my eyes down to the title of the legal filing. The words were perfectly capitalized and centered. Petition for appointment of probate conservator of the person and estate. I stared at the heavy black letters, my mind struggling to process their absolute, terrifying meaning. I moved to the next line. The document listed the proposed conservatee. It listed my name, William Bennett. It listed my home address. It listed my date of birth. Then I looked at the line identifying the proposed conservator, the person petitioning the state government for absolute legal control over my life. Matthew Bennett. A sharp physical chill radiated down my spine, settling deep into my bones. My son was not just stealing my money to throw a lavish party for his wife. He was actively petitioning the state court system to strip away my basic human rights. I was filing a legal motion to have me declared a ward of the state, completely devoid of any personal or financial autonomy. I turned slowly to the second page, my hands beginning to tremble uncontrollably. This section contained the preliminary statement of facts written under the penalty of perjury by the attorney representing Matthew. I read the paragraphs, slowly absorbing the sheer, unfiltered malice of the fabricated narrative they had constructed behind my back. The document stated that over the past 6 months, my cognitive faculties had severely deteriorated. It claimed that I was suffering from rapid, early-onset dementia. Matthew had provided a sworn statement claiming I was frequently confused, prone to dangerous memory lapses, and entirely incapable of managing my own complex financial portfolio. He explicitly detailed the fake story about me, forgetting the name of the restaurant on Victoria's birthday, twisting a minor, insignificant detail into fabricated medical evidence of my supposed mental decline. The conversation we had on the phone earlier that morning suddenly played back in my mind with terrifying clarity. Matthew had aggressively insisted that I was getting older, slowing down and losing my memory. He had not just been making excuses to keep me off the luxury cruise ship. He had been actively rehearsing his legal arguments. He was testing his gaslighting tactics, building a documented history of my supposed confusion. I flipped to the 3rd page. Attached to the legal petition was a glossy trifold brochure for an establishment called Shady Pines Assisted Living. It was not a luxury retirement community. It was a bleak state-run low-tier nursing facility located on the absolute outskirts of the city. It was the kind of miserable, underfunded institution where families dumped their elderly relatives when they no longer wanted to deal with them. Matthew and Victoria had already filled out the preliminary intake applications. They had forged my signature on the placement consent forms. They were actively planning to drag me out of my beautiful, sprawling suburban home and lock me away in a tiny, sterile room in a miserable facility. They were going to throw me away like a broken piece of furniture. I set the brochure down and looked at the final section of the legal packet. This was the true motive behind the entire nightmare. It was a comprehensive, meticulously detailed schedule of my personal assets. Matthew had used his access to my home office to completely catalog my entire net worth. The spreadsheet listed my $4 million commercial retirement portfolio down to the very last cent. It listed my primary checking accounts. It listed the current market value of this suburban house. It listed my investment bonds and my physical assets. He had calculated exactly how much wealth I possessed, and he had drafted a legal framework to seize absolute control of every single dollar the moment the judge signed the conservatorship order. I checked the timeline printed on the final execution page. The petition was completely finalized, signed by the predatory attorney, and dated to be officially filed with the county courthouse on the exact Monday morning Matthew and Victoria returned from their luxury vacation. The timing was utterly flawless and purely evil. The 10-day luxury Caribbean vow renewal was not just a celebration. It was a deliberate, calculated waiting period. It was a secure alibi. They were using my stolen equity to party in international waters, while the final legal preparations were quietly put into place. They fully intended to walk off that cruise ship, drive back to this house, hand me a court order, and have me institutionalized before I even knew what was happening. If I had not driven to this house today, if I had simply stayed home and felt sorry for myself like a defeated, rejected old man, their plan would have worked flawlessly. I would have welcomed them home next week, completely unaware that they were holding a legal lock and key to my entire existence. I would have been stripped of my wealth, my freedom, and my dignity in a single devastating afternoon. The profound sadness that had been suffocating me all morning simply vanished. The heartbreak of a father betrayed by his only child was instantly vaporized. In its place, a cold, focused, terrifying wrath began to solidify in my chest. This was no longer a family dispute. This was a battle for my very survival. I had spent 40 years building a commercial logistics empire by crushing competitors who tried to steal my territory. I had negotiated with ruthless corporate predators and walked away victorious. I was a man who understood how to protect his assets, how to defend his borders, and how to entirely dismantle an enemy operation. He had foolishly assumed that because I was his father, I would be soft forgiving and easily manipulated. He had assumed that my paternal love would blind me to his predatory tactics. He forgot that before I was an accommodating father, I was a man who built a financial fortress from nothing but dirt and pure determination. I gathered the horrifying legal documents, the cruise invoices, and the fraudulent bank loan agreements, tapping the edges neatly against the floor. I placed the entire stack back into the thick manila folder and closed the cover. I had found the financial theft. I had found the secret vow renewal. I had uncovered the legal plot to steal my freedom. I thought I possessed all the pieces of their sinister puzzle. But as I stood up from the hardwood floor, my knees popping slightly in the quiet room, a terrifying, unanswered question suddenly gripped my mind. In order to convince a state judge to grant an emergency medical conservatorship, Matthew would need more than just his own fabricated testimony. He would need physical, undeniable proof of my cognitive decline. He would need me to appear genuinely confused, lethargic, and entirely incoherent during the mandatory court evaluation. I walked slowly out of the home office carrying the heavy folder under my arm. How exactly did they plan to prove that a physically healthy, sharp-minded 70-year-old man had suddenly developed crippling dementia in the span of a few short weeks? I walked down the hallway and stepped back into the massive kitchen. My eyes drifted toward the large walk-in pantry. A terrifying realization struck me with the force of a physical blow. I thought about the Sunday family dinners over the past 3 months. I thought about the new health regimen Victoria had aggressively implemented for me. I marched straight toward the dark, heavy pantry door, absolutely and completely ready to uncover the final, deadliest secret of all. I marched straight toward the dark, heavy pantry door, absolutely and completely ready to uncover the final, deadliest secret of all. I reached out and pulled the wooden door open. The pantry was massive, practically the size of a small bedroom, filled with perfectly organized rows of expensive organic snacks, imported olive oils, and rows of bottled water. The overhead motion sensor light clicked on, illuminating the space. I ignored the neat rows of luxury groceries. My focus was entirely on the narrow wooden shelf installed at eye level along the right wall. This was Victoria's designated health station. It was heavily stocked with expensive protein powders, high-end matcha teas, and an array of complex daily vitamin organizers. Victoria was absolutely obsessed with holistic wellness. She tracked every calorie they consumed and managed all of their daily supplements with ruthless precision. And for the past 3 months, she had aggressively incorporated me into her rigid health routine. Every single Sunday, without fail, I drove to their house for our traditional family dinner. And every single Sunday, right after the main course, Victoria would place a small clear glass of water and a single unmarked white pill right next to my plate. She always delivered the exact same speech with a bright, encouraging smile. It is a new high-grade joint supplement. William. We did a ton of research. It is supposed to do absolute wonders for cartilage repair and inflammation. You play so much golf, we really just want to make sure you are protecting your knees. You have to take it with a full meal, so Sunday dinners are the perfect time. Drink up. I had never questioned it. Why would I? It was a simple vitamin presented by my daughter-in-law out of supposed concern for my physical longevity. I swallowed the white pill every week, touched that she cared enough to monitor my joint health. But now, armed with the horrifying context of the legal conservatorship documents, hidden in the safe, that innocent Sunday ritual took on a terrifying, sinister new meaning. I stepped deeper into the pantry, my eyes scanning the health shelf. I was looking for the source of those unmarked white pills. I pushed aside the colorful containers of protein powder and the rows of herbal teas. Tucked away in the very back corner, partially hidden behind a large canister of raw honey, was a small, generic-looking brown plastic bottle. I reached past the honey and grabbed the bottle. It was completely devoid of any colorful branding or bright, holistic marketing labels. In fact, it had no commercial label whatsoever. The only identifying mark on the smooth brown plastic was a small white pharmacy sticker. The sticker did not feature a patient name, a doctor's name, or even a pharmacy address. It simply bore a complex 12-digit alphanumeric serial number and a bold red warning symbol indicating a controlled substance. I began to pound a furious, erratic rhythm against my ribs. Joint supplements bought from a health food store do not come in generic brown bottles with controlled substance warnings. They come in bright packaging with lengthy ingredient lists. I unscrewed the child-proof cap. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the bottle onto the floor. I peered inside. The container was half full of small, unmarked, chalky white pills. They were the exact same size, shape, and color as the pills Victoria forced me to swallow every Sunday evening. A cold, terrifying dread washed over me. I needed to know exactly what I had been ingesting for the past 12 weeks. I pulled my cellular phone from my coat pocket. I opened my internet browser, my thumbs trembling as I typed the long, complex 12-digit serial number printed on the white pharmacy sticker directly into the search engine. I hit enter. The search results populated in a fraction of a second. The primary results were not links to holistic health websites or online vitamin retailers. They were direct links to the federal medical databases for heavy pharmaceutical narcotics. I clicked on the first official medical link. The page loaded, displaying the chemical composition and the primary medical uses for the drug associated with the serial number. The chemical name was long and impossible to pronounce. It belonged to a class of highly potent, heavily restricted chemical sedatives. I read the medical description slowly, the blood completely draining from my face. This specific narcotic was not designed to treat joint pain or inflammation. It was a heavy industrial-grade tranquilizer. It was primarily prescribed for patients suffering from severe violent psychotic episodes or extreme uncontrollable physical tremors. The warning section on the medical website was extensive and terrifying. It explicitly stated that the drug should never be administered to elderly patients unless absolutely necessary. The listed side effects of even a mild dosage included profound memory loss, extreme physical lethargy, severe cognitive confusion, and noticeably slurred speech. I stared at the glowing screen of my phone, the tiny black words blurring together as the sheer, monstrous reality of their plan finally crashed down upon me with devastating force. They were not just gaslighting me about my memory. They were actively chemically inducing the symptoms. Every Sunday evening, they watched me swallow a heavy black market narcotic under the guise of a vitamin. They were deliberately poisoning me. They knew the sedative would enter my bloodstream and systematically degrade my cognitive functions. They knew it would make me sluggish, confused, and prone to severe memory lapses over the next several days. That was exactly why I had not been able to remember the name of the restaurant on Victoria's birthday. I had not been experiencing early-onset dementia. I had been heavily sedated against my will. The medical conservatorship petition I found in the safe suddenly made perfect, horrifying sense. In order to seize legal control of my life and my $4 million estate, Matthew needed to prove to a state judge that I was mentally incompetent. But he could not rely on fake stories alone. He needed me to fail a mandatory court-ordered cognitive evaluation. He needed me to walk into a doctor's office confused, sluggish, and unable to answer basic questions. He needed me to physically display the exact symptoms of rapid aggressive dementia. And Victoria, the woman I had welcomed into my family, the woman who smiled brightly at me across the dinner table every week, was the one actively administering the chemical poison required to make that happen. They were systematically destroying my mind to steal my money. If I had not found the safe, if I had simply continued to attend their Sunday dinners, the heavy sedatives would have eventually caused permanent, irreversible neurological damage. I would have become the confused, helpless old man they desperately needed me to be. I would have been dragged into a courtroom completely unable to defend myself and legally locked away in a miserable, underfunded nursing facility for the rest of my natural life. The rage that had been simmering inside me instantly transformed into something else entirely. It was no longer just a desire for financial justice. It was a primal, desperate need for absolute survival. My own son was a profound, dangerous threat to my physical safety. I carefully screwed the child-proof cap back onto the brown plastic bottle. I did not put it back on the shelf behind the raw honey. I slid the bottle deep into my coat pocket. It was no longer a secret. It was hard, undeniable physical evidence of a highly coordinated, incredibly dangerous criminal conspiracy. I walked out of the massive pantry and stood in the center of their luxurious, open-concept kitchen. The empty champagne bottles on the island mocked me. The designer shopping bags in the living room taunted me. They had funded their extravagant lifestyle with my stolen equity, and they had attempted to pay for it with my stolen mind. I pulled my phone out again. I did not call Matthew. I did not call the local police department for a standard wellness check. I bypassed standard procedures entirely. I scrolled through my contact list until I found the name Benjamin Cole. Benjamin was a ruthless, highly connected corporate attorney who had represented my logistics company during our most aggressive, high-stakes commercial litigations. I was not a family lawyer who dealt in quiet mediations. He was a legal predator who destroyed corporate enemies for a living. I pressed the call button. Benjamin answered on the second ring. "William," he said, his voice sharp and professional. "I thought you were supposed to be on a luxury cruise somewhere near the Bahamas right now." "What can I do for you on a Saturday morning, Benjamin?" I replied. My voice was completely steady, stripped of all paternal weakness and replaced by cold, mechanical resolve. "I need you to meet me at your downtown office in exactly 45 minutes. Clear your entire schedule for the rest of the weekend." "William, you sound serious." Benjamin noted the casual tone, instantly vanishing from his voice. "What exactly are we dealing with here? Is there a problem with the company acquisition?" "It has nothing to do with the company," I said, walking toward the front door of the house I was about to completely reclaim. "I have just uncovered a massive case of federal wire fraud, a $500,000 real estate theft, and a documented active conspiracy to commit medical poisoning. And the primary suspect is my son." There was a brief, stunned silence on the other end of the line. "I will be at the office in 30 minutes, Benjamin said firmly. "Bring everything you have." "I have everything," I replied. I hung up the phone. I stepped out the front door, pulling it firmly shut behind me. The lock engaged with a heavy, definitive click. The battle lines were officially drawn. Matthew and Victoria were currently floating in international waters, completely unaware that the docile, forgetful old man they thought they had outsmarted was actively mobilizing a devastating legal strike that would completely obliterate their entire existence. The countdown to their absolute destruction had officially begun. The drive from the quiet suburban neighborhood to the bustling downtown financial district took exactly 42 minutes. I did not turn on the radio. I did not roll down the windows to feel the morning breeze. The silence inside my vehicle was absolute and necessary. I needed complete mental clarity. For the past 35 years, my identity was entirely wrapped up in being a provider, a protector, and a father. I had spent every waking moment trying to build a safe, comfortable world for my only child. That man, the accommodating, forgiving father, died the moment I read the medical conservatorship petition. The man gripping the steering wheel now was the founder of a massive logistics empire. I was a man who knew how to dismantle a threat with ruthless, mechanical precision. I pulled into the underground parking garage of a towering glass and steel skyscraper. This was the headquarters of the most feared corporate litigation firm in the state. I parked my car, grabbed the thick manila folder from the passenger seat, and made sure the heavy brown plastic pill bottle was still resting securely in my coat pocket. I took the express elevator directly to the 45th floor. The doors slid open to reveal a massive, pristine reception area decorated in dark marble and brushed steel. The receptionist recognized me immediately. She stood up from behind her desk and informed me that Mr. Cole was waiting for me in his private conference room. I did not offer her a polite smile or engage in small talk. I simply nodded and walked straight down the wide corridor. I pushed open the heavy glass doors to the conference room. Benjamin Cole was standing by a massive floor-to-ceiling window looking out over the city skyline. He turned around as I entered. He was a tall, imposing man in his late 50s, wearing an immaculate, custom-tailored suit. He had been my primary corporate counsel for over 15 years. He had helped me crush rival transportation companies and navigate complex, high-stakes commercial lawsuits. He was not a man who dealt in emotions. He dealt exclusively in facts, leverage, and absolute victory. He looked at my face and immediately understood that this was not a routine visit. I walked over to the long mahogany conference table and set the thick manila folder down in the absolute center. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out the unmarked brown plastic pill bottle, and placed it right next to the folder. I sat down in a leather chair. Benjamin took the seat directly across from me. He did not ask how I was doing. He simply asked me to explain exactly what I had brought him. I spent the next 20 minutes laying out the entire horrifying reality regarding the betrayal of my son. I showed him the forged home equity credit documents. I showed him the massive cruise ship invoices detailing the luxury vow renewal for the extended family of Victoria. I showed him the medical conservatorship petition designed to strip my human rights. Finally, I pointed to the brown bottle. I explained how Victoria had been actively chemically poisoning me with heavy industrial sedatives to fabricate a fraudulent medical history of aggressive dementia. I did not shed a single tear as I spoke. I delivered the facts with cold, unwavering precision. Benjamin listened to my entire presentation in absolute silence. He did not interrupt me once. When I finally finished speaking, he slowly picked up the forged bank loan documents. He scrutinized the digital signature file, his eyes narrowing with sharp, predatory focus. He then picked up the medical conservatorship petition, reading the fabricated statements my son had sworn under the penalty of perjury. He set the papers down and looked at me. The expression on his face was one of pure, unadulterated legal wrath. He told me that this was far beyond a simple civil dispute or a standard family law issue. This was a highly coordinated, multi-layered criminal conspiracy. He explained that we were not going to waste our time filing a report with the local municipal police department. Local detectives would likely view this as a messy domestic squabble and drag their feet for months. We needed a strike force that possessed the jurisdiction and the absolute authority to dismantle this operation immediately. Benjamin leaned forward and tapped his finger aggressively against the forged home equity loan agreement. He stated that because Matthew had used a digital network to submit fraudulent loan applications to a major national banking institution, and because the stolen funds were currently being used across international waters on a foreign-flagged cruise ship, the crimes had crossed major federal boundaries. This was a textbook case of federal wire fraud and aggravated identity theft. The medical poisoning and the conservatorship fraud were simply the icing on the cake. We were going straight to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We were going directly to their specialized financial crimes division. Benjamin picked up his office telephone and dialed a direct, unlisted number. He spoke briefly with a senior federal agent he had previously collaborated with during a massive corporate embezzlement case years ago. He informed the agent that he possessed hard, undeniable physical evidence of an active, massive federal bank fraud scheme. 10 minutes later, we left his immaculate office and drove directly to the heavily fortified regional field office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We were escorted into a secure, windowless interrogation room by two stern, sharply dressed federal agents specializing in major white-collar crimes. I sat at the cold metal table and handed over the thick manila folder and the brown plastic pill bottle. I spent the next 2 hours repeating my story, detailing the digital signature forgery, the stolen equity, and the sinister medical poisoning plot. The federal agents were meticulous. They cataloged every single document. They brought in a digital forensics expert who immediately confirmed that my signature had been electronically grafted onto the loan applications without proper cryptographic authentication. They bagged the narcotic sedatives for immediate chemical analysis at their federal laboratory. The lead agent looked at me and confirmed that the evidence was absolutely overwhelming. The crime was active, ongoing, and heavily documented. Benjamin aggressively pressed the agents for an immediate operational timeline. He pointed out that Matthew and Victoria were currently captive on a luxury cruise ship that was scheduled to dock back at the port of Miami in exactly 7 days. He demanded that emergency federal arrest warrants be drafted, authorized, and executed the very second that ship touched American soil. The lead agent nodded in firm agreement. He promised a coordinated federal strike team would be waiting at the port terminal. The trap was officially and legally set. I walked out of the federal building with Benjamin stepping back into the bright afternoon sunlight. The immense legal machinery of the United States government had been fully activated against my own son. But my retaliation was not even close to being finished. I still needed to completely dismantle the financial comfort he thought he securely possessed while floating in international waters. But my retaliation was not even close to being finished. I still needed to completely dismantle the financial comfort he thought he securely possessed while floating in international waters. Benjamin and I walked out of the federal building and immediately got into his vehicle. The traffic was heavy, but I barely noticed the cars surrounding us. My mind was entirely focused on the next critical phase of my plan. Getting the federal authorities involved was essential for the long-term legal consequences, but federal wheels turn slowly. I needed devastating action. I needed to cut off the financial oxygen supply my son was currently breathing. Matthew and Victoria were out there right now, likely sipping expensive champagne on a private balcony, toasting to their brilliant deception. They were funding their entire luxurious existence, paying for premium dining packages, and treating her extended family like royalty, all by swiping plastic cards tied directly to my life savings. I was going to turn those little pieces of plastic into worthless scraps of garbage. Benjamin drove us straight to the regional headquarters of my primary national bank. This was the massive corporate banking center where I managed my commercial accounts for over 2 decades. We parked in the executive structure and took the elevator directly to the top floor. The doors slid open to a quiet, elegant reception area with plush seating and polished marble floors. The receptionist recognized me immediately and quickly ushered us into the glass-walled office of the regional vice president, a man named Robert Sterling. Robert stood up with a welcoming smile, clearly expecting a friendly visit from a long-time high-net-worth client. That smile vanished the absolute second he saw the severe, uncompromising expression on my face and recognized the ruthless corporate litigator standing right beside me. I did not offer Robert a warm handshake or engage in the usual pleasantries about the weather or the local golf courses. I sat down in the heavy leather chair across from his desk, keeping my posture rigid and my voice completely flat. Benjamin remained standing, placing his heavy leather briefcase onto the polished glass surface of the desk. He snapped the latches open and pulled out a thick stack of documents. It was the official preliminary report we had just secured from the federal agents, complete with the case file numbers and the active fraud investigation stamps. "Robert," I said, speaking with slow, deliberate precision, "we have a massive security breach. My identity has been compromised, my digital signature has been forged, and a massive amount of equity has been fraudulently extracted from my property. The Federal Bureau of Investigation is currently treating this as an active, ongoing case of federal wire fraud and aggravated identity theft. The primary suspect is my own son, Matthew Bennett." Robert stared at me, the color completely draining from his face. He looked down at the official federal documents Benjamin had spread across his desk, his eyes darting over the terrifying legal language. As a banking executive, he knew exactly what a federal fraud investigation meant for his institution. It meant intense scrutiny, massive legal liabilities, and potential public relations disasters. He reached for his desk phone with trembling fingers and immediately summoned his chief compliance officer and the head of the branch fraud department. Within 5 minutes, we were sitting in a secure boardroom with 4 top banking officials. The head of the fraud department, a serious woman with sharp eyes, opened her laptop and immediately accessed my master client profile. I instructed her to pull up the recent $500,000 home equity line of credit that had been taken out against my property. She typed rapidly, her eyes scanning the digital ledger. She confirmed that the loan had been approved and fully funded just 3 weeks ago. She also confirmed that over $150,000 had already been drawn from the credit line to pay a travel agency and various luxury vendors. "Freeze it," I commanded, my voice echoing coldly in the quiet boardroom. "Freeze the entire credit line immediately. Lock down every single remaining cent. Flag the original application as a fraudulent transaction, utilizing a stolen digital signature. Do not allow another dollar to be transferred out of that account under any circumstances." The compliance officer nodded quickly, giving the authorization. The woman at the laptop typed a rapid sequence of commands. I watched the large monitor mounted on the boardroom wall as the status of the massive $500,000 credit line shifted from a bright, welcoming green to a harsh, locked red. The remaining available balance dropped to absolute zero. The massive financial well my son had illegally dug for himself was instantly sealed shut. But stopping the bleeding was only the first part of the operation. I needed to ensure they had absolutely nothing left to survive on while they were trapped on that ship. I directed their attention to the old joint checking account I had opened for Matthew 15 years ago. This was the account he was actively using to fund his daily life. The account he had drained to buy his wife expensive jewelry and designer clothes before the trip. I ordered the bank officials to instantly sever my name and my social security number from the account, effectively destroying its connection to my primary wealth portfolio. Then, exercising my absolute legal authority as the primary account holder, I instructed them to freeze the remaining balance, which was barely a few $100s. I demanded they place a hard stop on any incoming deposits and completely block all outgoing wire transfers. If Matthew attempted to ask a friend or another family member to wire him emergency cash to survive the remainder of his trip, the banking system would aggressively reject the transaction. He was financially isolated. The joint account was rendered completely dead. Finally, I pulled out my wallet and placed every single credit card attached to my name onto the boardroom table. I had primary cards, secondary cards, and the specific American Express card that Matthew was currently holding in his wallet, thousands of miles away. Report every single one of these cards as stolen, I instructed the banking team. Cancel them immediately. Do not issue temporary replacements. Flag any attempted charges as unauthorized fraud. The bank official typed the final commands into the central system. I watched the screen as the status of every active card flipped to canceled. With a single keystroke, the limitless stolen wealth my son and his wife were currently enjoying was completely vaporized. They were floating in the middle of the ocean, surrounded by premium bars, luxury dining rooms, and 20 members of their extended family. They were playing the role of wealthy, generous hosts, completely unaware that their financial life support had just been brutally disconnected. They had absolutely no money, no credit, and no way to pay for the lavish lifestyle they were actively flaunting. I stood up from the boardroom table, buttoned my coat, and thanked the bankers for their swift cooperation. I had cut the oxygen supply. Now it was time to take back their home. I walked out of the bank with Benjamin right beside me. I had successfully severed their financial lifeline. They were now floating in the Caribbean Sea without a single functioning credit card to their names. But severing their access to my bank accounts was only the opening maneuver. They still believed they had a secure, luxurious fortress waiting for them when they returned. It was time to completely dismantle that illusion. I instructed Benjamin to return to his office and finalize the coordination with the federal agents. My next task required a different kind of professional assistance. I drove my dark gray sedan toward the industrial sector of the city. I was not looking for a delicate moving service. I needed a massive, highly efficient crew capable of executing a total property purge. I parked in front of a commercial logistics warehouse. During my 4 decades running my freight enterprise, I had established connections with heavy-duty hauling contractors. I walked into the dispatch office and found a man named Marcus. Marcus ran a specialized rapid response moving crew. They were the kind of team hired to clear out massive commercial foreclosures or handle emergency industrial relocations. I sat down and laid out exactly what I needed. I explained that I was the sole legal owner of a sprawling 4-bedroom suburban property. I informed him that the current occupants were not legal tenants. Matthew and Victoria had never signed a formal lease agreement. They paid no rent. In the eyes of the law, they were merely non-paying guests residing in a property controlled entirely by my family trust. Since I was the sole trustee, I possessed the unilateral legal authority to revoke my permission for them to inhabit the premises at any given moment. I was exercising that absolute right effectively immediately. I hired Mark and his massive crew on the spot, paying double their standard rate for priority emergency service. I handed him the brass master key and gave him one single uncompromising directive. I wanted the entire $900,000 house stripped absolutely bare. The following day, at exactly 7 in the morning, 3 massive commercial moving trucks pulled into the quiet, affluent suburban street. The deep rumble of their heavy diesel engines shattered the peaceful Sunday morning silence. Neighbors peered out from behind their expensive window treatments, clearly shocked by the sudden industrial invasion. I stood on the front driveway with my arms crossed, watching intently as a team of 15 burly men in matching gray uniforms piled out of the trucks. I unlocked the heavy wooden front door and stepped aside, unleashing the crew into the house. The purge officially commenced. I stood in the center of the grand foyer and directed the flow of traffic. I watched them dismantle the lavish lifestyle my son had fraudulently constructed. They started in the massive open-concept kitchen. They emptied the expensive stainless steel refrigerator, throwing away the gourmet imported cheeses and the organic produce Victoria obsessively tracked. They packed up the premium espresso machines, the imported crystal wine glasses, and the high-end culinary equipment that had likely been purchased with the funds from my old joint checking account. From there, the crew moved into the main living spaces. I watched without a single ounce of pity as they wrapped the custom Italian leather sofas in thick moving blankets and hoisted them out the front door. They disassembled the massive 85-inch flat-screen television mounted on the wall. They rolled up the expensive Persian rugs. Every single piece of physical comfort and every decorative symbol of unearned wealth was systematically carried out to the waiting trucks. But the true reckoning occurred when they reached the master bedroom suite. I followed upstairs and stood in the threshold of the massive walk-in closet. It was the size of a standard bedroom, filled end to end with an absolutely staggering collection of designer merchandise. There were rows upon rows of custom silk dresses, premium leather handbags that cost more than a standard mortgage payment, and dozens of pairs of imported luxury shoes. I knew exactly how she had acquired this massive collection of vanity. She had built this wardrobe by bleeding my financial safety net completely dry. I ordered the moving crew to pack it all up. I did not care if the expensive silk was wrinkled or if the designer leather was scuffed in the process. They shoved the premium garments into standard cardboard moving boxes with relentless efficiency. By late afternoon, the 3 massive trucks were completely loaded. Every single physical item belonging to Matthew and Victoria, such as their clothes, their electronics, their luxury furniture, and their expensive personal trinkets, was completely removed. I instructed Marcus to drive the convoy to a specific location on the absolute outskirts of the city limits. I had not rented a premium climate-controlled storage facility in a nice neighborhood. I had secured a massive low-tier industrial storage unit situated in a dusty, poorly maintained commercial park right next to a loud freight train railway. It was the cheapest, most basic concrete box available for rent. It offered absolutely no temperature regulation and practically zero luxury amenities. It was exactly the kind of environment their stolen designer goods deserved. I watched the crew unload the boxes and furniture, stacking them haphazardly into the dark concrete cavern. When the final box was shoved inside, I pulled down the heavy corrugated metal door. It slammed shut with a loud final echo that resonated across the empty industrial lot. I secured the door with a heavy steel padlock and slipped the only existing key into my coat pocket. I drove back to the suburban house as the sun began to set. I walked through the front door and locked it behind me. The transformation was absolute and staggering. 48 hours earlier, this house had been a pristine monument to their arrogance. It had been filled with the scent of expensive champagne and the visual clutter of stolen luxury. Now it was a cavernous, echoing void. The grand foyer was empty. The massive open-concept kitchen was completely bare. The custom-built library shelves in the home office stood completely empty, wiped clean of his fraudulent corporate facade. I walked from room to room, my footsteps echoing against the hardwood floors. The house had been stripped down to the bare drywall. There was nothing left inside. No comfortable beds to sleep in. No televisions to watch. No designer clothes to wear. The luxurious sanctuary they believed they possessed had been entirely eradicated. I stood in the center of the empty master bedroom, looking out at the darkening suburban street. I had reclaimed my territory. I had purged their toxic presence. They were floating on a luxury cruise ship, completely oblivious to the fact that their entire world had just been locked away in a cheap storage unit. I took a deep breath. The house was empty, but my work was not yet finished. I stood in the center of the living room, listening to the absolute silence that had replaced their arrogant laughter. The physical purge of the empty house was complete, but the perimeter remained vulnerable. Matthew still possessed a brass key on his keyring, currently sitting in his pocket on a luxury cruise ship. I needed to ensure that when he eventually returned, that key would be entirely useless. I contacted a commercial security contractor I had used for my logistics warehouses. I demanded industrial-grade protection. Within 2 hours, a white van pulled up to the driveway. 2 technicians stepped out, and I instructed them to replace every single lock on the property. The front door, the patio entrance, and the garage access were completely overhauled with heavy-duty drill-resistant deadbolts. But physical locks were only the beginning. I ordered the technicians to install a comprehensive high-definition security camera system around the perimeter. They mounted discrete motion-activated cameras facing the front porch and the driveway. The system fed directly to an application on my cellular phone. I could monitor the property from anywhere in the world. I spent the afternoon walking through the empty rooms, verifying the camera angles. The house was now an impenetrable fortress. I set the master alarm code to a sequence of numbers only I knew. When the technicians finally departed, the sun had fully set. The house was dark-locked and completely secure. I drove back to my own home feeling a profound sense of territorial control. The trap was physically constructed. Now I needed to bait it. The following morning was a Monday. It was day 4 of their 10-day vow renewal extravaganza. While they were likely waking up to ocean views and premium room service, I was sitting in my home office brewing a strong pot of black coffee. I picked up the phone and called a real estate broker named Sarah. She was a fierce, highly successful agent who specialized in luxury suburban properties. I told her I had a premium property I needed to put on the market as soon as humanly possible. I gave her the address of the house Matthew and Victoria lived in. Sarah was slightly confused at first, knowing I had bought the house for my son. I quickly shut down her questions. I told her the situation had changed drastically, and I needed the property listed for sale before the end of the week. I instructed her to price it aggressively, slightly below market value, to guarantee an immediate cash buyer. Sarah recognized the cold determination in my voice. She promised to have a professional photography team out to the house by Tuesday and the official listing live on the regional real estate network by Wednesday. I had one very specific, highly visible request. I did not just want a digital listing. I wanted a massive, undeniable physical declaration of my absolute ownership. I told Sarah to order the largest, most prominent for sale sign her agency offered and plant it directly in the center of the perfectly manicured front lawn. On Wednesday afternoon, I drove past the property to verify the work. There it was. A massive wooden post driven deep into the green grass, supporting a bright, highly visible sign declaring the house was available to the highest bidder. The psychological trap was now perfectly set. The first few days passed with a strange, heavy calm. I spent my time working closely with Benjamin, finalizing the details of the federal fraud case and ensuring the arrest warrants were perfectly coordinated with the port authorities in Miami. The financial freeze I had initiated at the bank remained absolutely solid, but I knew the real storm was brewing silently in the middle of the ocean. Cruise ships operate on a specific financial rhythm. Throughout the week, passengers freely swipe their room key cards for premium drinks, spa treatments, and expensive shore excursions. The grand total accumulates quietly in the background. It is not until the final days of the voyage that the cruise line attempts to authorize the massive final balance against the credit cards on file. I knew Matthew and Victoria were racking up astronomical charges treating 20 people to the ultimate luxury experience. They were swiping my stolen credit line with absolute, arrogant impunity. Then came day 7. It was a Thursday. I was sitting on my back patio enjoying the crisp Colorado morning air, watching the birds flutter around the feeders. At exactly 9:15 in the morning, my cellular phone vibrated violently on the glass patio table. The screen illuminated displaying a text message from Matthew. It was the first contact he had attempted since he drove away to the airport a week ago. I did not open the message immediately. I took a slow sip of my coffee, savoring the bitter, robust flavor. I let the phone sit there. 10 seconds later, it vibrated again. Then a third time. Then a fourth. A rapid, frantic succession of digital panic. I finally picked up the device, put on my reading glasses, and unlocked the screen. The messages were a cascading waterfall of pure, unadulterated terror. The first text read, "Dad, my cards are declining. I think my bank placed a travel hold on my accounts. Can you call my bank for me?" The second message was more urgent. "Dad, none of the credit cards are working. The ship purser called me to the guest services desk. They cannot authorize the final payment for the vow renewal reception or the ship gratuities. They are threatening to lock us out of our suites. Where are you? Call me immediately." I sat back in my chair and read the messages over and over again. The profound satisfaction I felt was indescribable. I could picture the exact scene unfolding thousands of miles away. Matthew standing at the guest services desk, his face flushed with panic, trying to explain why a supposedly wealthy executive could not pay his massive luxury bill. The grand illusion they had built to impress her extended family was crumbling around them in real time. My phone began to ring. The caller identification flashed Matthew's name. The ringtone shattered the peaceful morning silence of my backyard. I did not answer. I just let it ring. I wanted him to feel the weight of my deliberate absence. The call finally went to voicemail. A minute later, a new text message appeared. "Dad, please. I am begging you. I do not know what is going on. Please send me a wire transfer so I can settle this bill." I locked the screen of my phone and set it face down on the glass table. I was not going to send him a single dime. The silence was my absolute final answer. Let them suffer the humiliation. Let them beg Victoria's parents for a loan to cover the massive debt they accumulated. I finished my coffee, stood up, and walked back inside my house. The trap was perfectly set, the bait was taken, and the jaws were rapidly closing. All I had to do now was wait for the ship to dock. The final 3 days of their vacation were a masterclass in silence. I remained safely inside my home, drinking black coffee and occasionally checking the digital security application on my phone. The cameras installed around the perimeter of the empty suburban property remained quiet. Matthew sent desperate text messages. The tone shifted rapidly from confusion to pure, unadulterated begging. He left voicemails detailing the humiliation of being escorted to the ship's security office. I explained that the parents of Victoria had been forced to use their own emergency credit cards to settle the massive final balance before the cruise line would allow them to disembark in Miami. I listened to his frantic voice, noting the absence of his former arrogance. He was no longer the confident executive who had carelessly banished his aging father. He was a terrified child who had finally touched the hot stove. I did not reply. I deleted the voicemails and cleared the text messages. I had spent 40 years fixing his mistakes, but this was one mess he was going to have to navigate entirely on his own. When day 10 finally arrived, the sky over Colorado was overcast, casting a flat gray light over the quiet suburban neighborhood. I arrived at the property at exactly 10 in the morning. I parked my dark sedan in the garage, ensuring it was completely hidden from the street. I unlocked the heavy new deadbolt and stepped into the echoing empty foyer. The house was freezing cold. I had turned off the climate control system the day the moving trucks cleared out their belongings. I walked into the bare living room and pulled up a simple folding chair I had brought from my own garage. I placed it directly out of sight from the large front windows, but perfectly positioned, so I could monitor the live video feed from the perimeter security cameras on my phone screen. I sat down in the absolute silence, my hands resting calmly on my knees. I was ready for the final act of this devastating play. At 2 in the afternoon, the security application on my phone chimed softly. A motion alert flashed across the screen. I tapped the notification, bringing up the high-definition feed from the camera mounted above the garage. A slightly dented economy sedan pulled slowly into the driveway. It was a far cry from the massive luxury vehicle that had transported them to the airport 10 days earlier. The engine idled roughly as the driver put the vehicle in park. The rear doors opened heavily. Matthew stepped out first. The crisp linen vacation clothes he had worn on departure were replaced by wrinkled travel wear. His shoulders were slumped, his face pale, and he looked profoundly exhausted. Victoria emerged from the other side, not smiling. The bright, condescending laughter that had echoed down this very driveway was completely gone. She looked deeply furious, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. But the true picture of absolute misery came from the final 2 passengers. The parents of Victoria, the snobby in-laws, who had gladly consumed my stolen wealth, climbed out of the cramped back seat. They looked absolutely disgusted. Her father looked flushed red with anger as he pulled out his wallet to pay the driver. They had clearly been forced to cover the cost of the emergency flights back to Denver and the cheap ground transportation from the airport. Their lavish all-expenses, paid luxury vow renewal had ended in complete financial disgrace. I watched the driver pop the trunk. Matthew walked to the back of the vehicle to retrieve their luggage. He pulled out the massive premium designer suitcases that had been purchased with my stolen equity. The heavy bags hit the concrete driveway with a dull thud. The driver did not offer to help them carry the luggage to the door. He simply rolled up his window and backed out of the driveway, leaving the 4 of them standing awkwardly in the cold, gray afternoon. I remained perfectly still in my folding chair. Inside the dark house, my eyes glued to the glowing screen of my cellular phone. The high-definition camera captured every miserable detail of their return. The mother of Victoria wrapped her coat tightly around her shoulders, glaring at Matthew with open, undisguised contempt. Matthew avoided her gaze entirely, grabbing the handles of the heavy designer suitcases and beginning the slow, humiliating march up the long concrete walkway. Victoria walked a few paces ahead of him, her head down, eager to simply get inside her supposed luxurious sanctuary and hide from the absolute disaster of their trip. They marched past the manicured hedges and approached the front lawn. That was exactly when Victoria finally looked up. I watched the security feed as her eyes locked onto the center of the green grass. She stopped dead in her tracks. Her entire body went completely rigid. Planted firmly in the ground, impossible to miss, was the massive wooden sign bearing the bright, bold words, declaring the property was for sale. Victoria let out a sharp, piercing scream that penetrated the thick glass of the front windows and echoed into the empty living room where I was sitting. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated panic. Matthew dropped the heavy designer suitcases directly onto the concrete. He stared at the massive sign, his jaw dropping open in total disbelief. The parents of Victoria stopped walking, their eyes darting from the sign to the house and then directly to Matthew. I could see the furious confusion erupting on their faces. Her father pointed aggressively at the sign, clearly demanding an immediate explanation. Matthew raised his hands in a frantic defensive gesture, shaking his head rapidly. He was stammering, trying to form a coherent sentence, trying to explain why his supposedly secure, fully owned multi-million-dollar suburban estate was suddenly on the open real estate market. But he had absolutely no explanation to offer, desperate to escape his furious in-laws. Matthew sprinted up to the front porch. He pulled his heavy brass house key from his right coat pocket. He jammed it into the lock. I watched him try to turn the mechanism. He twisted his wrist, but the new deadbolt firmly resisted. The heavy key was completely useless. He pulled it out, stared at the brass teeth in absolute confusion, and shoved it back into the keyhole. He rattled the handle violently, throwing his shoulder against the wood. The door remained perfectly immovable. Panic completely overtook him. He abandoned the door and rushed toward the large front window. Victoria ran up behind him, her face pale with terror. They cupped their hands over the cold glass, pressing their faces against the window pane to peer into the house. I sat completely still in the shadows, watching them discover the devastating truth. They looked past the foyer and saw the bare drywall. They saw the total absence of their custom furniture, their expensive electronics, and their entire fabricated life. The house was a dark, echoing void. Absolute terror washed over their faces. The absolute collision of their two contrasting realities was fully and finally complete. I watched them through the glass for another long minute. I watched my son press his forehead against the cold window pane, as if trying to magically conjure his stolen furniture back into existence. Victoria was hyperventilating, now her hands pulling at her hair. Her mother was shouting questions at Matthew, demanding to know where they were supposed to sleep and what was happening with the property. It was a symphony of perfectly earned consequences. I stood up from my folding chair. I smoothed the front of my jacket, took a slow and steady breath, and walked out of the shadows towards the grand entryway. I reached the heavy wooden front door. I placed my hand on the new brass deadbolt and turned it with a loud, definitive click. The sound echoed sharply in the empty foyer and instantly silenced the frantic shouting outside. I pushed the door open and stepped out onto the wide concrete porch. The cold afternoon wind hit my face, but I felt absolutely nothing but burning focus. The four of them turned to look at me simultaneously. For a brief second, nobody moved. They just stared at me, standing there on the porch of the house they thought was theirs. Matthew looked like he had seen a ghost. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him pale and trembling. Victoria took a step backward, hiding behind her father. Her parents just looked utterly confused, clearly expecting to see a real estate agent or a property manager, not the man they thought was too frail to attend their luxury vacation. Matthew finally found his voice. He took a hesitant step toward the porch. "Dad." He stammered, his voice cracking with panic and confusion. "What are you doing here? Where is all our furniture? Why are my credit cards completely frozen? What is going on with the house?" He fired the questions rapidly, hoping his aggressive tone would somehow intimidate me into giving him the answers he desperately wanted to hear. I was still trying to play the role of the dominant executive who was in complete control of the situation. I did not raise my voice. I did not yell or display any of the profound anger that was currently boiling inside my chest. I looked down at him from the elevated porch, maintaining absolute terrifying silence until he completely stopped speaking. When the quiet returned to the driveway, I finally spoke. "I am standing on the porch of the property that is legally owned by my family trust," I said calmly. "I am currently preparing to sell this property because the previous occupants proved to be massive financial liabilities. Your furniture, your expensive designer clothing, and every single item you purchased with stolen funds has been permanently relocated. And your credit cards are declining because I personally reported every single one of them as stolen to the Federal Fraud Department." Matthew stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. He could not comprehend the reality I was presenting to him. He shook his head frantically. "You cannot do this," he yelled. "We live here. You gave us this house. You cannot just empty it out." I reached into the inner pocket of my coat. I pulled out a thick, heavy white envelope. It was not sealed. I held it up for a moment so he could clearly see it. Then, with a casual flick of my wrist, I tossed the envelope down the concrete steps. It landed directly at his feet with a soft thud. "I suggest you open that, Matthew," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "because it contains the absolute final answers you will ever receive from me." Matthew looked down at the envelope as if it were an explosive device. His hands were shaking violently as he reached down and picked it up. Victoria slowly crept up beside him, peering nervously over his shoulder. The parents of Victoria stood frozen on the lawn, watching the drama unfold with growing horror. Matthew opened the flap of the envelope. The very first thing that fell out was a single cheap brass key attached to a plastic tag. The tag had a storage unit number written on it in black marker. "That key belongs to a low-tier industrial storage unit on the outskirts of the city," I explained coldly. "I packed every single piece of your fraudulent lifestyle into that unit. It has absolutely no climate control, so I suggest you collect your expensive silk dresses before the humidity completely destroys them." Matthew swallowed hard, clutching the key in his trembling hand. But there was more inside the envelope. He reached his fingers back inside and pulled out a thick stack of folded papers. I had made high-quality copies of every single document I had extracted from his hidden fireproof safe. As he unfolded the pages, the first document to catch the gray afternoon light was the Federal Home Equity Line of Credit Agreement. I watched his eyes scan the bold black letters at the top of the page. I watched him see the staggering total of $500,000 printed in the principal loan box. And then I watched him look down at the bottom corner of the page, where my perfectly forged digital signature rested on the execution line. The moment he saw that forged signature, the remaining strength completely vanished from his legs. He let out a strange, breathless gasp and dropped heavily to his knees right there on the hard concrete of the driveway. The papers fluttered slightly in the wind, but he gripped them tightly, staring at his own undeniable guilt. He knew instantly that his impenetrable hidden safe had been breached. He knew his massive federal crime was fully exposed, but he was not finished reading. The next document was the medical conservatorship petition. He saw the fabricated statements he had sworn under the penalty of perjury, claiming I was suffering from aggressive early-onset dementia. I looked directly at Victoria, who was now staring at the legal papers held by Matthew. "And just so we are completely clear, Victoria," I said, my voice cutting through the cold air, "I found the generic brown bottle hidden behind the raw honey in your pantry. I found the heavy industrial sedatives you were slipping into my water every single Sunday night to chemically induce my supposed memory loss." Victoria gasped, bringing her hands up to cover her mouth. She backed away from Matthew, her eyes wide with absolute terror. She knew I possessed physical proof of her conspiracy to poison me. The father of Victoria finally stepped forward. His face was purple with rage and confusion. He demanded to know what those papers were. I turned my attention to the older man, who had gladly consumed premium champagne on my stolen dime. "Mr. Ellison," I said calmly, Your luxurious family vacation was entirely financed by massive federal bank fraud. Matthew forged my digital signature to steal $500,000 from me. He is guilty. He dropped to his knees because he knows his perfect life is entirely destroyed. Matthew remained on his knees, clutching the copies of the forged loan documents. He looked up at me with an expression of absolute terror. He opened his mouth, trying desperately to formulate another lie, attempting to find some miraculous combination of words that could somehow explain away a $500,000 federal fraud. But there were no words left. The paper in his hands was undeniable proof. The mother of Victoria stepped forward, her face twisted in a mixture of horror and profound outrage. She looked from the storage unit key resting on the concrete to the legal documents in my hands, and finally to her daughter. She demanded to know if this was true. She demanded to know if the luxury vow renewal they had just attended, the premium suites, the champagne, and the extravagant dinners had all been paid for with stolen money. Victoria could not even look her mother in the eye. She simply covered her face with her hands and began to sob uncontrollably. The father of Victoria turned his absolute fury toward Matthew. He shouted that they had been humiliated, that they had been made unwitting accomplices to a massive crime. The grand illusion of wealth and success that Matthew and Victoria had so carefully constructed was completely shattered, leaving behind nothing but the ugly, pathetic reality of their greed. Matthew finally found his voice. He begged me to listen. He stammered that he had planned to pay the money back, that it was just a temporary loan to give Victoria the wedding celebration she truly deserved. He claimed he never wanted to hurt me, that the medical conservatorship was just a precaution, a legal safety net just in case my health failed. It was pathetic. He was still trying to gaslight me, still attempting to manipulate the narrative right in front of the undeniable physical evidence. I did not interrupt him. I just stood there on the porch of the empty house, looking down at the stranger who used to be my son. I let him spin his pathetic web of excuses because I knew it did not matter anymore. His words were entirely meaningless. The time for family discussions and paternal forgiveness had expired the moment he forged my signature and handed his wife a bottle of heavy sedatives. Before Matthew could continue his desperate begging, a sudden sharp sound cut through the cold suburban air. The heavy hum of powerful engines approached rapidly down the quiet residential street. I looked past the manicured lawn and watched as two massive unmarked black sport utility vehicles sped toward the property. They did not slow down to admire the neighborhood. They moved with aggressive tactical precision. Right behind them was a fully marked local police cruiser, its red and blue lights flashing silently, casting an eerie, chaotic glow over the gray afternoon. Matthew stopped talking. He turned his head, his eyes widening in pure panic, as the convoy aggressively swerved into the driveway. The vehicles moved with absolute authority, completely blocking the entrance and boxing them in, so there was absolutely no avenue for escape. The quiet, affluent street was instantly transformed into an active federal crime scene. Doors flew open simultaneously. Men and women wearing dark, tactical vests with the bright yellow letters of the Federal Bureau of Investigation printed across their chests stepped out onto the concrete. They moved with swift, uncompromising efficiency. The lead agent, the same man I had spoken with in the downtown interrogation room, alongside my attorney, walked directly toward the group standing on the lawn. He did not ask questions. He did not politely request their cooperation. He spoke with the absolute authority of the United States government. He loudly announced the name of my son and the name of my daughter-in-law, declaring that he held active federal arrest warrants for multiple charges of wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and conspiracy to commit medical endangerment. The parents of Victoria immediately backed away, their faces pale with shock, raising their hands to show they were not involved. They looked absolutely terrified, suddenly realizing the profound legal danger their daughter had dragged them into. Two federal agents moved swiftly toward Matthew. They grabbed his arms, hauled him roughly to his feet, and pushed him against the side of the black vehicle. The sharp, metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs echoing across the driveway was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard in my entire life. They patted him down, pulling his wallet, his cellular phone, and the useless brass house key from his pockets. At the exact same moment, another pair of agents approached Victoria. She screamed, struggling and pulling away, as a female agent firmly grasped her wrists and secured them behind her back. She cried out for her father, begging him to do something, pleading for him to call a lawyer. But her father simply turned his head away in complete disgust. He refused to look at her. The neighbors, who had undoubtedly been drawn to their windows by the flashing police lights and the commotion, were now stepping out onto their porches. They watched in absolute silence as the supposedly wealthy, successful young couple of the neighborhood was treated like common criminals right on their own front lawn. Their pristine social reputation was instantly and permanently eradicated. They were completely stripped of their dignity, their stolen wealth, and their freedom, all in a single devastating afternoon, as the agents began to escort Victoria toward the back of the police cruiser. Matthew violently twisted his body around to look at me. His face was stained with tears and completely distorted by pure terror. The arrogant executive who had confidently canceled my vacation via a morning text message was entirely gone. He was nothing but a broken, terrified boy facing the absolute destruction of his life. He looked up at me, standing firmly on the porch. "Dad, please!" he screamed, his voice cracking with desperate, suffocating panic. "Please tell them to stop. Do not let them do this to me. I will pay you back every single cent, I promise. I am your son." I looked down at him. I felt absolutely no pity, no regret, and no hesitation. The man who had sacrificed his entire youth, his sleep, and his aging physical body to provide for that boy had been systematically poisoned and discarded. I looked right into his terrified, weeping eyes. My voice was perfectly calm, completely devoid of any warmth or paternal affection whatsoever. "My son could not make the cruise," I said slowly, ensuring every single syllable carried the full, devastating weight of his betrayal. "I do not know who you are." I did not wait for his reaction. I simply turned my back on the pathetic scene unfolding on the driveway. I walked back into the empty, secure house. I paused for one brief second, listening to the muffled sounds of their federal arrests continuing outside. Then I closed the heavy wooden door behind me and engaged the heavy brass deadbolt with a loud, definitive click. The absolute justice was finally served, bringing the dark chapter to a complete end forever. 3 months later, the dust had finally settled over the absolute wreckage of the life my son had tried to build on a foundation of lies. The transition from the chaotic, emotional nightmare on the driveway to the cold, clinical reality of the federal justice system was remarkably swift and incredibly brutal. When the federal agents drove away that gray afternoon, taking Matthew and Victoria in heavy steel handcuffs, they took the very last remaining fragments of my paternal hesitation with them. I walked back into the empty suburban house and stood in the absolute silence. For the first time in years, I did not feel the heavy, suffocating burden of obligation. I did not have to worry about fixing a mistake, covering a financial shortfall, or pretending that the woman my son married was a decent human being. I was completely and utterly free. The legal aftermath was a masterclass in systematic destruction. Benjamin Cole, my ruthless corporate attorney, was absolutely relentless in his coordination with the federal prosecutors. He made sure that every single piece of evidence I had, recovered from the hidden fireproof safe, was completely weaponized. The digital signature forgery, the fraudulent $500,000 home equity line of credit, and the undeniable physical evidence of the heavy industrial sedatives formed an ironclad, unassailable federal case. Matthew desperately tried to fight it at first. He attempted to hire an expensive defense attorney, but quickly found himself using an overworked public defender when his stolen funds were permanently frozen. You cannot argue with perfect paper trails and irrefutable digital forensic data. When the prosecution presented the overwhelming mountain of evidence during the preliminary court hearings, the fragile, toxic alliance between Matthew and Victoria completely shattered. Victoria, in a pathetic and desperate attempt to save herself, turned against my son immediately. She offered to testify against him, claiming that Matthew had masterminded the entire financial fraud, and that she was merely a naive, innocent wife who had absolutely no idea where the massive influx of money was coming from. It was a poorly constructed lie. The federal agents had already reviewed the security footage from the local pharmacy and accessed her encrypted digital messaging history. They possessed undeniable proof that she was the one actively acquiring the dangerous black market sedatives and orchestrating the sinister medical poisoning. When the federal prosecution flatly rejected her plea deal, she completely collapsed right there in the courtroom. Matthew is currently sitting in a maximum security federal detention center, awaiting his final sentencing hearing. Because the wire fraud crossed state lines and involved a major national banking institution, the federal sentencing guidelines are incredibly strict and completely unforgiving. His public defender informed him last week that he is facing a mandatory minimum of exactly 15 years in federal prison. 15 years. The boy I raised, the son I broke my back to put through expensive universities without a single dime of debt, will spend the absolute best years of his adult life locked inside a tiny concrete cell. He sends me desperate letters every single week from the detention center. The envelopes are stamped with the official seal of the federal prison system. I do not open a single one of them. I take them straight from the mailbox and drop them directly into the industrial paper shredder in my home office. There is absolutely nothing he could write on those pages that would ever erase the terrifying image of him holding a forged document designed to steal my entire freedom. Victoria faced a similarly devastating and entirely earned reality. The federal government exercised their absolute authority and seized every single physical asset she possessed in an attempt to recover the stolen banking funds. The massive collection of designer clothing, luxury handbags, and expensive jewelry I had locked in that cheap, unclimate-controlled storage unit was completely confiscated and auctioned off to the highest bidder. Stripped of her stolen wealth and facing multiple felony conspiracy charges, Victoria was forced to file for complete personal bankruptcy. The grand illusion of the wealthy, successful marketing executive was entirely obliterated. She also filed for a messy, highly publicized divorce from Matthew, desperately attempting to distance her ruined reputation from his criminal record. Her snobby parents, the people who had gladly consumed premium champagne and enjoyed luxury ocean views on my stolen dime, were profoundly humiliated. The entire affluent social circle they desperately tried to impress quickly learned that their luxurious destination, vow renewal, was entirely funded by felony bank fraud. They became absolute social pariahs in their suburban community. Victoria is currently living in the dark, unfinished basement of her parents' home. She has no money, no husband, no social status, and absolutely no future. The arrogant woman who looked at my calloused hands with complete condescension is now a convicted felon who will struggle to find basic minimum wage employment for the rest of her natural life. As for the house, the beautiful, sprawling suburban property I bought entirely in cash, it was completely purged of their toxic memory. Sarah, my ruthless real estate broker, kept her professional promise. The massive for sale sign on the front lawn generated immediate regional interest. Because the property was in pristine condition and located in a highly desirable school district, we received multiple aggressive offers within the very first week. I did not entertain any lengthy negotiations. I accepted an all-cash offer from a nice young family moving from out of state. The house sold for significantly above the original asking price. When the closing documents were finalized and the massive wire transfer hit my primary trust account, I felt a profound sense of absolute closure. I had completely reclaimed my territory. I took the massive financial return from the sale of the house and combined it directly with my substantial commercial retirement portfolio. I no longer had to maintain an invisible emergency safety net for a son who actively despised me. I no longer had to worry about meticulously saving my wealth for the next generation. The entire concept of an inherited family legacy died the exact moment I found that medical conservatorship petition. Instead, I began to focus entirely on my own happiness, my own peace, and my own unwritten future. For 40 years, I woke up at 4 in the morning to manage commercial logistics fleets. I traded my youth, my sleep, and my physical energy to build an impenetrable financial fortress. Now it was finally time to actually live inside it. I am currently sitting in a private luxury departure lounge at the international airport. The premium leather chair is incredibly comfortable, and the ambient acoustic music is perfectly relaxing. Through the massive floor-to-ceiling glass windows, I can see the massive commercial airplanes preparing for takeoff against the bright blue morning sky. I am holding a premium first-class ticket to Europe. I am not going for a quick standard vacation. I have absolutely no return flight booked. I plan to spend the next several months traveling across Italy, Spain, and France. I want to see the ancient architecture, taste the rich, authentic food, and walk through the historic cobblestone streets without a single worry in the entire world. My cellular phone is resting quietly on the polished glass table right next to my steaming cup of premium espresso. It is not buzzing with frantic panic text messages. It is not ringing with desperate demands for money or manipulative, fabricated lies. The silence is absolutely beautiful. I am 70 years old, but for the very first time in my entire life, I feel completely young. The heavy, invisible chains of toxic family obligation have been permanently broken. I am a man who survived a calculated assassination of my character and my freedom. I fought back with ruthless mechanical precision, and I emerged completely victorious. The poison is completely gone. The betrayers are securely locked away in their self-made prisons. And I am finally stepping into the glorious, peaceful retirement I earned with my own 2 hands, entirely unburdened. Blood does not guarantee loyalty, and sacrifice does not guarantee respect. For decades, I believed that giving my son everything I never had would build a foundation of gratitude. Instead, it built a solid foundation of entitlement. True family protects you. They do not plot your demise in the shadows to fund their own vanity. Never ignore the red flags just because they are waved by someone you deeply love. You have the absolute right to protect your peace, your assets, and your life. Forgiveness is a noble concept, but survival and personal respect must always come first, every time. If my story resonated with you, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel right now. Have you ever discovered a shocking betrayal from someone you completely trusted? Share your experience in the comments below. Let us support each other. See you in the next life story. Stay strong.